Guess we'll do some event viewer in Sysmon as has been requested of me. So as anyone has questions, please jump in, but we'll just kind of wing it from there. There is a VApp, very tiny VApp with just a single Windows 10 system. So if you want to follow along a little bit down the road, turn that on and all that jazz. But let's go through a couple slides first. So event logs, DefSec, all that stuff. Like why is this relevant? Hey, I mean, you can read the slide too, but actions, things that happen on systems will show up in event logs. Malware, bad guys, red team, anything the red team does, and specifically red team actions will all show up in event logs, which is why that's very relevant for CCDC and just DefSec things in general, right? Logs are definitely also useful for troubleshooting. If you can't get something to work, logging will help with that. But use them, learn where they are, and that's what we're going to do today. So yeah, the simple VApp, I already mentioned that. Didn't know I had this slide. It's been a couple days since I've been through these slides, but again, we're winging it. So Windows event logs, we'll log into that Windows 10 VM. You can open that up right now already if you want to follow along and find the event viewer. But the event viewer is going to be kind of the simple way to view Windows event logs. There are three kind of main event logs that are in Windows: the application log, system log, and security log. And you can read the descriptions of those on the screen, right? Application log is going to be more application specific things. It's not necessarily every single application that runs on a system would be in the application log. A lot of other applications have their own log within the Windows event log. And once I get into the GUI, I can click around and show you that as well. System log will be system component events. If you're trying to deal with hardware issues, driver issues, things like that, that's where you're going to go for those. And there's some other things in there that can be useful for us as well. But for the most part, when we're dealing with trying to track down actions, what happened on a Windows computer, what did red team do, the security log is going to be pretty useful for that. The most useful, in my opinion, of the kind of these three listed here, right? You see some of the things that you'll see there: logins, log off, file access, resource usage, kind of all security related things. The screenshot on the right is a screenshot of some event log in event viewer. And again, I'll open that up in a moment. A couple of the kind of key components, I think that's, yep, last slide I have on that. A couple of the key components within every Windows event log. Event ID is going to be a big one, right? Every type of event has a specific identifier, that event ID. And I got a number of them on the slides coming up that I'll kind of list out some important ones that can help you do various things. The one you're looking at in the screenshot here, it says event 4624. Every event ID 4624 is going to be a logon event. And you can see right on the top, it says an account was successfully logged on. That's what happened in that event. That's what that is logging. All of the event logs should have a level, and I don't care about that too much when I'm doing more security tracking. When I'm trying to find what's wrong, why is the system broken, this could be useful. But a lot of the things we'll be looking at are just informational. There's other items in here. You see categories, keywords, the computer. This is going to be the name of the system that the log actually occurred on. The time, of course, and this box up here is essentially the meat and potatoes of it, right? What actually happened in that log? What is that log event trying to tell us? So on the Windows system here, I'm just going to search for event viewer to pull that up. And pretty much all flavors of Windows, modern flavors for sure, will look exactly the same. When you get pre-Vista, I believe, some of the actually pre-7, I think pre-7, some of the numbers will change, some of the event log IDs will change, but this is the event viewer. Honestly, I feel the event viewer is an absolutely terrible way to look at event logs, but it's what we have. It's slow and painful quite often, but again, that's kind of all we get. Main dashboard here, you can see a couple different things or different ways of viewing the logs that exist. Almost always, I'm going to come over here on the left side under Windows logs. Is this coming through on the stream well enough, size-wise?
It's mostly legible.
Okay, good. I never know with like the 720-ish and whatnot. Okay. Windows logs, so you can go under that, and this is where you will see application security and system. Those are, again, are the kind of three main ones that I talked about. If I click into one of these, I'll go into system. We can just look at some of the logs. All the logs will show up here just in a nice list. You'll see some information of each of the logs, event IDs over on the right-hand side here. 7040 is this top one. Looks like some sort of service control stuff. And this is what the actual event is. So down here at the bottom, in that general is where you can see that. Sometimes this will be pretty lengthy, so you might have to scroll in that area. Details will just be more specific and isn't as pretty to look at. But yeah, this specific event log type of 7040 looks like something to do with service state changed or something changed with services. So you can look into more of those things if you want. Under applications and services logs are where you'll find other types of logs that will be specific and helpful. PowerShell can be pretty helpful as well. I don't really have anything specific on PowerShell for this presentation, but Sysmon, once we get there, we'll find in here as well. Just kind of general event viewer stuff. Again, this is kind of a hard way to look through things, in my opinion, but this is the list, right? You can kind of scroll through the list of all of the events that exist. And if it's an active system, some of these logs will become very large very quickly, or at least it will feel like that to a human analyst or a human operator. Filtering will be useful. Or on the right-hand side, you'll see current log. If I wanted to look just for example, 4624s, I can throw that in the event ID there and see any log on events, which apparently there's absolutely nothing because I'm in the system log, and you're not going to see those in the system log. That'll be in the security log. That is why. So if you filter that for 4624s, this will be every single log, which it looks like a bunch, right? I can absolutely promise you I have not logged onto the system 747 times since it was created. But there's a lot that goes into a logon event, and we can dig into that a little bit in a moment. I'll actually jump into the next slide and kind of set of slides. If I click, it goes better. The next set of, I think there's probably 8 event log IDs here, are ones that are pretty useful for hunting. So if you're trying to find red team doing something or trying to monitor your system, these are some of the go-to Windows logs that you'll have. So 4688 and the 592 number, I believe, is pre-7. So Vista and earlier. I can't remember for sure if Vista's on either side. I think Vista is the old like XP numbering, but if you're unfortunately dealing with one of those systems, you might have different numbers than the higher numbered numbers, I guess, that I'll report on here. But again, 4688 as the new process was executed. So anytime anything is run, if you double click on Google Chrome, there theoretically could be a 4688 event for that, right? If you're trying to track what executables are being run on a system, that would be a way to do that. I think you actually need to turn on process auditing for that to work. So I can just look at 4688. Now there is process auditing, but it's not super detailed. I can get into, well, yeah. So the thing we don't have in here is command line. So that actually is for sure an option that you would have to enable, which is honestly super useful with any new process. So if an attacker was in a command prompt or PowerShell, for example, and they ran net user and wanted to see what users are on the system, if you have just 4688s here, you would see net.exe was run. But we wouldn't necessarily be able to see what they did. In my example, actually run net user. But if you had full command line details, you would be able to see that. I don't remember right offhand where that is, that setting, but in group policy, if you search group policy, command line auditing, you'd find that setting to enable that. In any case, Sysmon will have details about that in a little bit. But as I just kind of click around in here, you'll see this view is ugly to try and see what processes are all being created. Scroll down. I would think I could make, honestly, I've never done it, but you should be able to make custom views probably to pull out some of those key fields sometimes. Whenever you get inside of a message like this, inside of a log event, these fields aren't as easy to extract all the time. Um, Back over here, 4624 is accounts logged on. We talked about those briefly. There are different logon types, right? And that will kind of get me back to the I didn't log on 4624 747 times. But not all of these are actually me logging out of the system as an interactive logon. There will be a logon type somewhere. Not that. Or logon type 5. Logon type 5 tells me exactly what type that is. I don't have no idea what that is offhand, so we're going to do a little Googling on a different screen. Windows event logon type. I will pull that over once I find something I know is decent. I don't know why I find myself going to this site frequently, but I just searched Windows logon type. But these are some of the different logon types. So that one was 5, and that specific log event I just pulled up. So that was a service logon. Some service logged on to something or authenticated as some account, which account name is just the computer account, right? So you could filter this down, look for specific logon types. If you're trying to find someone log on through remote desktop, you'd be looking for a 4624 event ID with logon type 10 as an example. Moving on, 5140 is a share was access. This could be indicative of lateral movement. So if you've got attackers moving around from system to system, shares and SMB and things like that can be logged through here. 5156 network connection happens by a process that's being logged by the Windows firewall. Seeing network connections down to a process level is super, super useful. If you ever see calc.exe making a network connection, you should be very, very afraid. Yeah, like that should not happen, right? And a 5156 is a place you could possibly do that. I think Sysmon does it better, and we'll do that in a moment as well. 7045, new service being installed. If you're installing things, you might see a bunch of those. If you're not installing anything, you really shouldn't see those. But if attackers are going to install their own services, install things, that theoretically would be logged. 4663 is file and registry auditing. So any modifications to those types of things, any new files were being created, you do have to enable file auditing on that. And then back on the 4688, it's just the new process creation. I think we talked about that one already, but the command line auditing, I don't know why I have that one in there twice. Command line auditing, again, that's a big deal with that one. There's a couple other ones that can be useful. Password resets, new users are being created. Again, if you are not doing these things in CCTC or you did them all at minute 2 and you see these things happening after minute 2, that's something to investigate, right? Figure out what happened. Was it red team? How'd they get in? Kick them out? Yada, 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 right? You can see some of those other things in there as well. So yeah, that's kind of a super quick overview of Windows Event. I'd encourage you to poke around here, make custom views and things like that. I don't want much deeper on that just because Sysmon is really cool and can do a lot more logging for us. Actually, one last kind of thing I'll leave you with just on event logs in general, which is relevant for Sysmon as well. Again, this viewer for event logs, I don't like a bunch, right? It's not no, don't do that. Clear my filter. That's what I want. It's not the best viewer ever. I've heard of some third-party viewers out there. I don't necessarily trust them. Real world, what you would have set up here is you're not going to look through Windows event logs on an event viewer like this for hunting purposes or like doing threat hunting or trying to run down an incident. What you would have set up is some sort of SIM, security event management solution, some log aggregation tool, Splunk, Graylog, the Elastic Stack, something like that, some of those types of tools. You'd send all of these logs or some of these logs that are useful, absolutely everything, but some of these logs over to that server, those centralized servers, and you do your analysis there. If you're trying to get something done quickly, look at just a couple things. The event viewer is going to be a great place for that, but that's about it. If you can get all of your logs off of the computer onto one of those other servers that are good for log aggregation and searching through that, definitely do that. So Sysmon, that kind of goes hand in hand with this last bit here. Sysmon will do more monitoring and do more logging than just base Windows will. It is only that. It does only monitor and log based on what it sees. It doesn't do the analysis piece, right? That is largely up to you. That is up to other tools that you use with Sysmon. If you throw everything over to a Splunk server and throw on some dashboards and analysis tools on top of Splunk that can help you analyze those Sysmon logs, that'll be a great thing, a great way to do it. But Sysmon at a core is just doing the logging. It is a Windows service and a driver. It's not made to be stealthy. That's not its goal. Originally created by Mark Russinovich, and he does now work for Microsoft. And if you don't follow him on Twitter, I think it's kind of fun sometimes when he's playing with 24 terabyte VMs in Azure. But just an aside. So what does Sysmon actually log? I believe this is every single event ID that Sysmon will log. And this is expanding a lot. Like every year, there's probably a couple more new types of logs, and these are being refined as time goes on as well. Because Sysmon is becoming more popular, it really is a great tool for additional enhanced logging on Windows. You'll see some overlap here, like process creation. We saw that in 4688s before, just in the Windows event log, but you might see more information in the Sysmon version. And there's also some filtering you can do with this as well. Some other ones that I find interesting, I love to see network connections when I'm doing threat hunting, network connections, process creation, like what's happening on the system, files being created, that can be interesting. But a lot of some of the newer techniques, I guess they might not be as new anymore, but starting to use WMI events consumers and things like that for execution. So they added that to Sysmon probably 5-6 years ago. The 19, 20, 21 event IDs out of Sysmon didn't exist, right? DNS events is a fairly new. Really, all those at the bottom are pretty darn new, but can be some pretty useful information, right? Now, if we were to go and log all of this information, absolutely every network connection your system makes or is made to your system, every single process that's created, every DNS lookup event, every file creation, that's going to be super noisy, right? There's just a lot of data to look through, and then think about that at the scale of an enterprise, right? You have thousands of computers with active users on them. This stuff is just way, way too overwhelming. Sysmon needs to be configured, and it has, or you have the opportunity to filter what you gather with Sysmon. So we don't have to gather every single network connection, and you probably shouldn't. Real world, you really shouldn't, because it's not going to be super useful, right? As an example. So there are some samples out there on GitHub. One that folks always seem to come back to is the Swift security Sysmon config on GitHub. This is by far not the only one. It was probably one of the first big ones as a base configuration. It looks like there was an update 27 minutes ago, which I absolutely do not have in the V app, but it's fine. But I do have a copy of this downloaded into the V app. So you can go in here and kind of look through. They do break it down into the sections. So Sysmon event ID 1 is process creations. I don't believe, so they do pull every process create except what is in this list. So everything in this list is an exclude. So I don't care to see search indexer.exe starting when it's using the /embedding command line. Like, we know that's normal. Service host.exe, there's just a lot of stuff that it does. It's there all the time. This whole section is all service host. So these are all exclusions. Like, these are a list of known command lines that service host will do. So if you see service host doing something different or service host in a different directory, it would catch that, right? Now, when you're pulling in any sort of Sysmon configuration, I would really encourage you to read through it and understand what you're about to implement, right? The network connection one here, it only includes specific things. So you're not going to catch everything here, right? It's definitely not going to catch things like Chrome connecting to the internet, because that happens a lot and you might not want to see all of that. But if I do see psexec or psexec service or tor.exe making connections to the internet, that's possibly sketchy and you should probably want to look into that, right? Or cmd making a connection to the internet, or even net, right? These are some legit admin tools, NSLOOKUP, things like that, PowerShell. But if someone who's not a legitimate admin is making connections with those types of tools, that might be something you'd want to look into, right? There's a lot in this. I'm not going to go through all this. I'd again encourage you to do that on your own time if you would like. But we're going to actually get that installed here on our VM. So I'm going to minimize that and I'm going to open up PowerShell. You can open up a command prompt too. Whatever works, doesn't matter. But you do need to run this as an administrator to get Sysmon installed. We are installing a service on the system that Sysmon will be running as. So I'm going to open up PowerShell in a administrative context. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so y'all can see it a little bit better, including me. And we'll install Sysmon here. So on the desktop, I have Sysmon 64. You can just search for download Sysmon and there'll be the sysinternal site where you can download Sysmon. Pretty easy site to navigate there. And this Sysmon config default here is the Swift on security config. That was a loud, weird noise. And this one that says modified is one that I did modify. I changed a absolute tiny bit with it, largely because I want more data for our example. So I believe all I did, the event ID 2, not 2, 3. Event ID 3 right here. This is network connections. I basically got rid of the include and said just basically pull in everything. And that should pull in everything except these very specific items here. It's not going to grab localhost, things like that, but it's going to pull in almost every network connection. So way too noisy for a production environment, probably, but I just want more logs for us to play with in our lonely single VM here. Anyway, to get this installed and running, I'm going to move over to my desktop here. So you see, typing's hard. Oh boy. Users, DSU, desktop. And I want to run sysmon64.exe. If Sysmon was already installed and you wanted to update the configuration, you'd use -c and then the path to the file that you want to configure it with. It should not be installed on this VM yet, so I'm just going to use -i for install. And then I'm also going to provide the sysmon config modified.xml. That's the one I'm going to throw in and configure with. I think that's right. Yeah, that looks good. You can also add in -- except EULA. I believe that will work. It's LA, not A. I'm going to get rid of that just to show you what happens. But if you were in a command line only environment, you would have to do. This is the EULA and user license agreement. This is what you'd accept if you added that last piece on there, but I'll just do that. Agree. Configuration file was good. We start the driver. There's a new driver. There's a new service that is installed. And we're good to go. That's it. So Sysmon should be installed at this point. Should be running with this configuration, right? And again, there's more configurations out there. I think Dave Kennedy yesterday, I was watching something of his and he talked briefly about Olaf Hartong, I believe. He has a Sysmon modular. I haven't looked into that too deep, but that's another example of other configs. But anyway, that's the one we're using right now. So back into the event viewer. Sysmon logs are not in any of these three main logs up here. They're not in application, security, nor system. Sysmon logs, I believe, will be under applications and services logs, Microsoft, Windows, and yes, this is a very, very, very long. So we'll scroll down a bunch until we find Sysmon, I think. It's not there. Super. I need to refresh possibly. Oh, come on. Is this a demo fail? It should be in there. Microsoft Windows Sysmon operational. Yeah.
Demo fails.
There we go. Now it's there. So maybe give it a moment. So yeah. Scrolling. Better. And part of this, you'll see why I got rid of those network connection exclusions or just inclusions, right? That's most of what we're going to see here. But this is it. So the Sysmon operational log, this is the log that you would ideally save off to another system, a SIM, a log aggregation tool, something like that. But this is everything that Sysmon's gathering right now based on that configuration. So I can look at just some process creates. mmc.exe was created right here. And here's a command line. mmc.exe, eventviewer.msc. Right, that was me opening this event viewer. Event viewer is an MMC utility. And we can see that very plainly there, right? And that process command line actually helps a bunch. If I pull up a command prompt, for example, and just run like net user, something like that. I think that works. Nope. I need to run this as an admin or just in my other PowerShell because that is an admin. Net user, bad guy, add. I think that's the syntax. So I have a new user called bad guy, probably without a password, but that's fine. If I run back here, it does say, hey, new events are available. The event viewer does not update on a rolling basis. So you do need to manually refresh it. But I'm going to actually filter as well just to process ID 1, because I'm going to try and look for that specific event, right? So I actually see a couple. I see right here was when Sysmon was created, or not Sysmon. The command prompt was opened. So that's the command line that was actually run. This is their directory it was run from. This is the user that ran it. So DSUs, who I'm logged in as, opened the command prompt. And if I look at the parent image right here of explorer.exe, that basically tells me the user probably just double clicked on it, which is largely what I did, right? From here, if I go up one, I see net.exe was being run. There's the full command line. Again, you get the user, you get the parent, cmd.exe, because I ran net user within cmd.exe. One more, and you actually see net1.exe is what's being run. So right now we have explorer to cmd.exe to net to net1.exe is kind of the path, the process tree, what we have going on here. But you can track all that, right? That failed. So then I went to PowerShell. So this time here where we have this net.exe, there's the command line. There's the actual command that the red teamer ran theoretically, right? Net user bad guy /add and created a new user. I couldn't do that in this context, but this was cmd.exe. This just shows us that the process ran, and the process ran successfully, but the process returned to us that we didn't have permission, right? And I don't really have any way to see that in. This is the next time where it actually did work, where the parent was PowerShell, went into PowerShell, and we can track that very, very well if we're running Sysmon. Again, this isn't the best, most fun way to look through these logs, but it works. Also within process create, we do get hashes. These can be pretty useful if we're trying to track down malware, something like that. So this would be the hash of this version of net.exe. So something like imp hash can be pretty useful for malware tracking, things like that. If I clear that filter, we can look at some other things. I'm going to look at, just for fun, event ID 3. I don't know why I like networking so much, but I do. Theoretically, I'm not doing anything on the network on this machine right now, right? Like I haven't opened up a web browser or tried to ping around anywhere or anything. I am actually accessing this box over remote desktop, so we might see some logs related to that. But this is just interesting to see how noisy these systems are, right? Search UI.exe, well, what's that? If you look back in the image path, it says Cortana in here. It looks like Cortana is making a connection over port 443 to that IP. Probably something Microsoft related, right? Like, and this is somewhat to show, even when I'm doing nothing, there's a service host connecting to Akamai, more of that Cortana searchy stuff. Like, I'm not even trying to search anything. And it's like every couple minutes, it's making connections. Service host, system, NetBIOS. Interesting. Doing some NetBIOS stuff. It's a DNS request right there, but there's a decent amount of network connections while I'm not doing anything, right? And this is why we have to have filtering in those Sysmon configuration files, because if we capture absolutely everything real world, it's way too overwhelming, right? If you're trying to just capture everything in a quick CCDC environment and you have this being piped over to some other box like Splunk, um, that's not as bad because you can work through some of that data. But again, there's pros and cons to all of that and the length of the uh, CCDC event and things like that. I'm curious what this DNS query one was. cdn.onenote.net. I didn't know OneNote had a .net. I believe it probably does. It's probably a legit thing, but I didn't do anything with OneNote. I don't know, just interesting stuff. That does end the slides. Is the last slide, and I can just kind of dink around and make network connections and see what things look like. Well, there's some log file created when I opened up the event viewer.
I had a
But
quick question, if you don't mind.
yeah, for sure.
So, I think in Sysmon you discussed the event IDs and how each event ID has like a action correlated with it, that like what it represents.
Mhm.
I noticed on there was like a create remote thread event ID. Is it possible to maybe like create your own event IDs or identifiers for things?
I don't think so.
Okay.
So my list of the Sysmon event IDs was just this is like where you download Sysmon, which this version came out last month. But as you scroll down here, you can actually read more as to what these things actually are. So the create remote thread, here we go. That's what that one does. Process creating a thread in another process used by malware to inject code and hide in other processes, things like that. Right. So
Alright,
that's why a lot of these event types exist, especially some of the newer ones, is just because of techniques that they've seen malicious actors using.
gotcha. So in red teaming, don't do that for CCDC. We'll use other techniques, right?
When red teaming for CCDC, I would do everything and see how much the blue teams can catch.
Cool.
Because I would guess they're not going to catch a lot of it. But that's what this talk is for, right? This
Yeah,
is
you never
another
know.
method to log that at the very least.
Alright, thanks, man.
So you mentioned that there's filters to stop just garbage from showing up like trusted applications.
Mhm.
So do those filters like exactly match the command line arguments? So for example, if you ran, what was it? I think it was, yeah, there. So if you run like SVC host with those flags, but you also have more flags after that, or is it just matching? Like, is it a partial match or a complete match for the command line?
So it depends. I think you can do both. These ones say condition equals is, so I believe this is going to be an exact match. As I scroll up, you'll see some other ones that are begin with. So then that's obviously a partial match all of this and other stuff afterwards. So can have both.
And also, say red team like overwrites one of those executables,
Mhm.
then that event would not show up.
Yes, if you're only matching on, okay. If they override those executables, that event could show up because this wouldn't necessarily be an event ID 1. That would be a file creation. Yeah, so event ID 2, I think overwriting would still be a file creation. So you'd see that overwriting action happen. But then if they go back and say, for example, if they were to replace service host.exe and they run exactly this, that process creation event ID 1 would not be caught because the command line matches that exclusion. Right?
Yeah, okay.
Yep. It's like there's always pros and cons to excluding things. Right. I'd love to see absolutely everything, but I don't want to see anything that's legit. So how do you filter out the actually legit stuff and not filter out Tristan hacking into my system? It's always a hard problem. Any other questions?
Can you use this for automation within Windows?
What do you mean by that?
Like if an event pops up and it's like, that's probably not supposed to happen. Kill it. Kill it.
I would sure think so. I don't know a ton about automation and tools that would do that type of automation, but I would imagine it would exist. Because it's not gonna, yeah. I mean, like something more refined, I guess. It has nothing to do with Sysmon, but a tool like that would just need, or PowerShell would just need to read the event log, right?
Mhm.
Which that's a pretty standard thing. And that's also useful because every decent log aggregation tool there will be able to read Windows event log, and that's all this gets put into. Any other questions? All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, Cody.
Yeah, no problem. We'll call it there.
Thanks for coming up.
I'd encourage y'all to